Welcome to Sleek Notes E-Commerce Boost Podcast, your chance to learn from the e-commerce experts so you can boost your business.
In this episode, you'll learn all you need to know about demand generation, the 3 top challenges you might meet when you do it, and of course, how to overcome them and the number 1 metric you must look at. All of it is brought to you by Pam Didner, who's an international speaker and top-selling author and senior marketing consultant at Relentless Pursuit. Let's go.
All right. I am rock and roll and ready to go.
Great. So first of all, welcome to the show, Pam. Could you maybe just real quick explain to me what demand generation is?
Well, I think demand generation, it's kind of like what that term is, generating demand for your products and services. So it's any marketing activities that you do that attempt to build awareness and facilitate considerations, customers' purchase. That's how I see what demand generation is.
And what is your experience with demand generation?
My experience of demand generation tend to be launch related. When I say launch, is major product launches, for example, or more event-driven type of activities. But the thing is launch events with integrated marketing campaigns. So they are part of the paid media efforts. There is PR elements. There's social media outreach. So it's, if you think about it, using a major product launch at the center, and then there are other activities that around that center that build awareness for that new products. Does that make sense? So it's a marketing campaign to drive awareness and working with the PR and the multiple different marketing functions to, again, drive the demands for the new products that people are not aware of.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So it's a lot of things really, isn't it?
Yes, it is. The way I see demand gen, it can be one individual, it usually tie with one specific thing. That sounds bad. It's probably not good to use it. It's tied with a specific effort. For example, on a smaller scale, if you write an ebook, and you can tie your demand generation effort around that ebook to make sure people are aware of that ebook. But at the end of the day, it's not really the ebook per se. Is you provide certain benefits, for example, the education and elements of it, and to make sure people are aware, their pinpoints, what are some of the solutions that they can leverage to solve that pain point, and hopefully make them aware of their needs, and then using ebook as a means to make sure that they understand their needs and become aware of your products, and then from there possibly drive engagement with them.
Coming up, hear the story about Pam's first encounter with demand generation and what made her first attempt super successful. Also, what factors must you remember if you want to succeed with your demand gen strategy? Here's Pam again.
Yeah, that was the first time I participated in the launch meeting. So that was back, 10, 15 years ago. And I was part of the marketing operations team. And I joined the team and without much of a marketing experience, because I did not graduate with journalism or a marketing degree. My background was accounting way back long time ago. And I remember the first time I joined the launch meeting, and then they are using a lot of terms I'm not totally familiar with. And value proposition, what is the theme for our launch, and then, what are some of demand gen activities that we have to do. And I did not ask many questions. I was just listening in and then write down as many terms as possible that I have no clue
what they meant. And then eventually I just follow up with people and have them explain it to me. It went very well. The reason it went very, very well is they actually had a weekly launch meeting, I would say 4 months before the launch. So that's about 16 weeks, right? And that was before the product was 100% finalized. And they had a meeting and they talked about specific activities that everybody would do. That whole launch meeting had about 20 people. They have a product marketing team people there. They have engineers there, which who were subject matter experts, and then PR is part of the team. They also have a launch manager, kind of like a program manager that managed the whole launch activity and coordinated with everybody. I think the key things is actually the coordination and communication.
Oh, wow. Yeah, cool. So that sort of brings me to my next question, because let's pretend I owned an e-commerce company and I really wanted to make demand gen work for me. So where should I start? Would that be setting the right team or?
Yeah, that's a good question. I personally think there are a couple things we should do if we decide to make a demand gen work. And well, there's probably a lot of things from planning to execution, to be honest. But you point out the right things to do is a matter of putting a right team together. And before you even do that is to identify what are some specific sales objectives and also communication objective that you want to accomplish, right? What are some sales goals? And what are the activities you think that will be helpful to support that sales goal? And then identify the right team members that who are actually doing that. Then kick off a meeting and have a conversation. The most important thing is actually identify and agree on success metrics. So how do we measure the outcomes of the demand gen effort or the marketing executions that you are planning to do?
Yeah. Do you have like an example of some good metrics to sort of start from?
I was thinking about that. From my perspective, it really depends. It depends on your marketing campaign activities. So, for example, you decide to use email, right, and to drive a demand gen. Then your metrics it should probably related to the opening rate of the email and some of the metrics may be related to the A/B testing that you are doing. So my take on this in terms of metrics, it depends on the marketing tactics. That's one way of looking at it at the very tactical level. And another layer of that is really you can use a term called conversion, right? And say you are using email and you do measure opening rate, but the ultimate destination and the goal of that email is to drive conversion or maybe content downloads or getting a specific lead. So that's another layer of the demand gen effort. And at the time you have to look at your nurturing path. So of course the opening rate is like the first stage of account acquisition if you use email. Then from that, where does your prospect go? Where do you lead them? And if you lead them to, say, content download, and then hopefully if they download the content, you capture their email list, that's the initial NQL, then you probably have to measure that. So like I said, it's the nurturing path. What is your nurturing path? And then you can determine for each stage, what is the first point of contact metrics, and also the end, what is the final destination? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Do you think, maybe, I know some people aren't very keen of it, but do you think you can mention maybe a couple of results you've achieved with demand generation?
I don't really have kind of like a favorite metrics. And if you do social media campaigns, especially pay Facebook effort, your metrics will be different. than if you do, say, paid commercial effort or a paid sponsorship. And at the end of the day, what I usually try to look at is conversion rate, right? So whatever activities that you do, you want them to do something. There got to be some sort of, say, a call to action associated with it. So what is that call to action? And does your prospect or the people you try to reach, did they take that action? So if they take that action, then your demand gen can be considered successful. If they don't, right, what can you do to improve?
I was wondering, so you said conversion rate is one of the good things to track. Does that necessarily mean that they are making money if their conversion rate improves?
I would like to answer that way from two perspectives. And the conversion rate, it really depends on how you set your marketing efforts. Let's assume your call to action is, hey, you want to encourage people to use the coupon or the promo code. And that certainly has a direct tie with sales, right? Either they use it or they didn't use it. So that's actually really black and white. But at the same time, that's obviously drive the demand gen effort in kind of like in a consideration stage down to the purchase stage, right? And so that is a direct tie with sales, no question about it. However, if your call to action is really to download the content, and if that's the case, that's indirectly tied with the sales because you got their email list, and they can be potentially a prospect that you can either nurture or the prospect, depending on what kind of content they download. If they download something that's really, about comparison guides of the product features and pricing, well, that's actually interesting. You can make assumption that they might be looking into buying the product. Otherwise, they will not be looking at the pricing. Then that prospect, if you think about it, possibly can be SQL. Then that's also directly tied with sales because you can basically say, hey, there's a potential that this can be a conversion or can be a possibility to purchase our products down in the pipeline. So that from my perspective can be directly tied with sales for that specific content they download. But if they just download something like, the 5 trends of digital marketing or the future trends of something or, I don't know, technology, some sort of technology 101. But they are interested, but they are not necessarily at the stage of moving down to the next stage of a consideration or purchase. And that type of effort, you can basically say is, okay, potential prospect leads. We need to find out a little bit more about the person, or we can determine, how we can further reach out to them, either by programmatic retargeting, or can we reach out to them through another email, a couple of days down the road. Right. So for that's not directly tied with sales, right? Not yet. So the metrics can be, you need to think about it in terms of what you want to do, what kind of calls to action you plan to set up and establish. Then you can determine what your conversions are and how you measure that. Is that helpful?
Yes, absolutely. So I was wondering, it sounds really cool, but is there not any challenges one could meet when they're doing demand generation? Where can people go wrong?
Well, it's I think there are a lot of challenges if we do marketing. The first one is always budget constraint, right? Not a lot of us have a lot of budget, so we need to be very, very creative in terms of what we want to do. And resources constraints, everybody tends to have a small team.
right? And the sales team always want us to do everything, but we can. So it's a matter of prioritization. So the challenges can be the budget, can be resources. And another thing that people don't talk about it, and I think it's very important, is technology. Everything we do is tied with technology in the back end, right? So say if you use Buffer, a lot of people use Buffer or Hootsuite for the social media syndication. And there is analytics associated with that. But from time to time, I don't know about you, and the technology is not necessarily working 24/7. You run into the glitches, and that your scheduled post for some reason was not was scheduled but didn't show up on the real social media channels. And another thing is webinar, for example, right? Webinar, a virtual event in a way, right? And how many times I have done webinars, hundreds of times. And there were times it was just the technology was not working. Either people did not hear me, or I cannot get on the webinar due to my connection, or there's some glitches that happen because of the tools, and we end up canceling the webinar. So there are things like, even we did a dry run. We did the test, we did a dry run before, and we make sure everything is buttoned up, but something still happens. So when you touch on technology, you just need to be aware something might break. And if that's the case, what is your backup plan?
So I was just thinking, do you maybe have any favorite tools you want to recommend to our listeners which you find really helpful?
I like analytics. At the end of the day, that's look at the data. But one thing that I'm doing right now is just make sure that all the marketing activities that I do, or demand gen activity I do, there's a pixel associated with it, or there's some sort of tracking mechanism. So you kind of know that if people come to your site, where do they come from? Do they come from your email effort? Do they come from your social media? Or do they come from your pay effort? So make sure that you have a right track mechanisms associated with each channels that you do in your outbound. So Google Analytics is actually nice. Any kind of tools that you use, I wouldn't go out for my favorite tools per se. It really depends on your personal preference a lot of time. And just make sure whatever tools that you select, there is analytic features associated with that.
Next up, are humans lazy? Pam will serve up her 3 best tips to a successful demand generation strategy, including how to make sure your laziness doesn't mean the death of your strategy. And finally, find out what a post-mortem is and why Pam thinks it's so important.
The number one is to have a collective agreement on metrics with your team members. Understand as a team collectively, what are the desired outcomes, and what are 2 or 3 metrics that we should track as a team. Then have processes and tools in place to really track them. A lot of time what I have found is people will set up metrics and they document it. That's all good, but they really don't have processes and tools to really track them, and they do it manually. But if you do it manually, humans are lazy, including myself, right? If everything needs to be done manually, I will not do it after 3 or 4 months. So understand and have metrics, agree on the metrics, then use a specific set of tools and process to track them. So that's number 1. Second, align and agree on objectives and strategy, and also your persona. I cannot stress enough that that it's very important if you have a big team that everybody agree the objectives of the demand gen effort, and also the strategy, the how to tactics that we want to do, and understand that who
is the target audience that we want to go after, right? If you don't agree on objective strategy and also target audience, there will always be some sort of disputes at the execution stage. People will always ask, so who are we talking to? Why can't we create this specific content, instead? But if you actually agree on objectives, agree on the strategy, agree on the persona, then you can say, oh, well, Jack, say that's the IT manager that you want to go after, really doesn't open the white paper on Facebook. Therefore, we are not doing a paid Facebook campaign. I'm just using that as an example. Or people will say, you know what, we need to make our video very interesting and we should use a puppet. I'm exaggerating. But you can always come back and say, well, we agree that we want to market to Jack. Jack is the IT manager, and they want fact to be presented to him. Using puppet is really not going to work very well. So if you agree on objective strategy and a persona, when you actually have a discussion or have a dispute down the road or arguments, you can always come back to your objectives that everybody agrees upon. You can always come back to a persona that everybody aligns and use that as a conversational driver to mitigate any arguments, if you will. So that's second one. The third is what I call postmortem. After the launch or after any launches, get together as a team to review the data. This is what I come back to, a data-driven type of activities, and you mentioned that a couple of times as well. Find out what worked and didn't work. So have a conversation. It's kind of like a therapy session. Once you have a conversation and say, you know what, we did this for email. There's something wrong with our subject headline that really didn't work and didn't resonate. It didn't drive a lot of opening a click-through rate. So have that kind of conversation. A lot of times therapy works is people talk about it. So we should do that as well. After the launch, it's not like, oh my God, the launch is done, let's move on. Can we get together one last time and actually have a postmortem and talk about it, what works and what didn't? And then hopefully we'll learn something along the way, and then we do better the next time.
Great. Amazing tips. Great tips, Pam. Thank you so much for your time and have a really nice day.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right, that was all from E-Commerce Boost this week. Pam Didner invites you to get in touch with her through her website, pamdidner.com, if you want to learn more about demand generation. If you enjoy this podcast, I'll be absolutely thrilled if you could rate it in whatever app you get your podcast from. And also, if you're craving more e-commerce tips, simply hit subscribe so you don't miss out on our next episode. See ya!
This session of E-Commerce Boost was produced by Sleeknote. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on tactics and strategies that'll help boost your e-commerce.